So I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to Integrate Detroit's August 2023 session, Business in a Box, where we set up a business in a box. We'll start at the first step, which is 0 if you're a programmer, identity and access management. There we go. Integrate Detroit's mission is to support the development of software and engineering within Detroit and reduce the race and gender gap among software technologists in this fair city. My name is Richard, and our gracious host is Callie. Thank you all for joining us. What we'll learn today is how to configure Syncope and SonarQube to communicate with each other and connect in Docker. Using Docker allows you to push it up into various cloud platforms and run it on your own systems. We'll be using SAML so that the two systems can communicate. SAML stands for Security Assertion Markup Language. It's XML, and they use several key cryptographic features to help keep it secure. We're going to start with an icebreaker, and then I'm going to go into a quick demo and show everything working. We'll get started by deleting all of the containers and volumes and start configuring SonarQube. After which I'll talk about some of the next steps for business in a box. A quick icebreaker for us here. If I was a dog breed, I would want to be a retriever. I like to find solutions to problems. Feel free to speak up if you'd like.
I think I would be a pug. I feel a connection with pugs personally.
I like that. Imagine.
Well, I would be, let's see. I would be one of those race dogs, right? One of the racing dogs. They look like they're having so much fun when they're going around the track.
Like a greyhound?
Greyhound, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. That's a cool one too. If I could learn any language instantly, that would be binary. Be able to look at binary and know exactly what it's doing on a given architecture or processor would be really cool. How about you, Callie?
I want to say something weird like ancient Egyptian so that I could do something nobody else could do.
Yeah, hieroglyphics. That's fun.
Yeah.
Well, weird fact I know, the neurons in your brain can actually move around. They move to reorganize themselves and get a more optimal set of connections. So as you're learning things, the structure of your brain literally and physically changes. It's a really cool thing to think about.
I also have a weird fact off the top of my head. I learned that honeybees have 5 eyes. They have 2 compound eyes, and then in the middle of their forehead, they have like 3 smaller ones.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I wonder what those other 3 eyes are used for. Light detection or maybe a different wavelength? Who knows?
Not sure.
So, a little bit about myself. My name is Richard Barker. I've been developing software for 9 years last month, and I've been with Integral for just almost 2 years now. I love coding. It's just as much of a hobby and a passion as it is a career for me. I've always been into technology. As a kid, I was the one who was fixing all of the stuff in the house. that got broke. It was fun, you know. So here we are. Now, let's dive right into this demo here. Going to come back here. So what I've got set up now is Syncope. This is what the dashboard looks like. Gives you some system load information, user groups, and statuses. All of that information set up with that connected over here to SonarQube. If you're not sure what SonarQube is, it's just a scanner for various code applications and projects to help you find code smells, bugs, and things like that. So this is my user, and what we're going to do now is go on, get out of the way. Into Docker, going to select all of that and delete it. Bye. It's nice knowing you. Give it a couple of seconds and it's all going to be gone. Then I'm going to go delete the volumes. What we're going to do from there is run Docker compose up in a command line and have that recreate all of this information for Docker. Once that's done, we can then go configure Syncope and SonarQube and connect the two together. I have a very useful README in our repository for this, which is linked in the event. And the general setup is we configure Syncope and then SonarQube. And once those are configured, they're connected together. So let's get right into Syncope here. The following volumes, after I've deleted them, wrong button.
I'm gonna post some of the links in the chat while you're going along here.
Okay. This thing is in my way. All right. Yep. Docker compose up will create all of the containers, all of the volumes needed for them, and start running them. All of these images are provided by Apache on Docker Hub, so I did not have to create any of these myself. It'll take a few minutes here to get up and running, and there will be a few service restarts. That's normal and natural. It'll happen while it's trying to get everything started. And certain times it tries to connect to something that isn't exactly ready to be connected to yet. This set of images uses Nginx to map to the inside of the container system and the outside, allowing me to access like this and allowing the two to communicate with each other, or the containers to communicate with each other. Oh, still not up yet. Takes a few minutes here. Oh, see, we're getting closer and closer. It will continue to change exactly what it's saying until it's up and we get a login. Did something go wrong? Does not look like it. Nope. Still setting up. Okay.
So Richard, why does Apache offer these as like free Docker images?
Well, the software that they have, they maintain it as free and open source software. The Apache Foundation has been doing this for a long time, and they have a ton of different software out there. I think the more important factor is, though, that much of what Apache has created here is very likely used by cloud platforms like AWS and GCP. And I know for a fact at least 2 or 3 of these are, one of them being Kafka, which I'm sure many of us have heard of. It's a distributed, publish, and subscribe messaging system. A lot of people have used it. Many people may not have heard of PDF Box, but it allows you to programmatically build a PDF. So it's free and open source software, and they provide the images for people to use. Looks like we've got Syncope up and SonarQube. Cool. So the default admin username and password is admin and password. For Syncope, the default username and password for SonarQube is admin and admin. SonarQube will force you to change it as soon as you log in. I'm just gonna change it to password. That is not what you want to do in production. Here we're logged in as the administrator. We need to be logged in as the administrator when it comes time to set up SAML's authentication. We'll get there in a little bit. The first thing we need to set up is Syncope. And as we can see here, the users and groups have been deleted. There's one role, and that is by default. So the first step is to go here. We go to configuration and implementations, and that'll give us the interface we need to set up various rules. We're going to start with the account rule here. This little gray box will pop up when you click the plus on any one of these screens, and it happens across the application. And it can be very hard to notice at times. So we're going to select the Java engine, and as you notice, there is Groovy available, and you can write your own. It's one of the great things about Syncope is it's extensible without having to pull down their software and start writing code inside their repo. They allow you to extend it by setting up a project using one of their templates. So here we have our default account rule. This is what sets certain defaults and requirements for account names, usernames. We're going to do the same thing with a password rule. Now here with the password rule, we also have the ability to set up a have I been pwned configuration, which will go out and check the have I been pwned website with your password and deny that password if it's found. This JSON will be transformed into a GUI. We'll see that later. If we were to change these values here, we would be able to change the defaults of that GUI later. So now that we have our rules, we can go into our policies and we can start creating our various account and password policies, access, and things like that. Default account policy. I'm going to go ahead and give you 5 maximum authentication attempts. We have no resources set up, so that's why these lists are empty. And we're going to go ahead and propagate suspension so that if I happen to suspend my account, it'll go out to any other system that's connected. We're going to come here into the password rules and do the same thing. I said rule when I meant policy. We're going to say a history length of 3 so that you can't use the past 3 passwords that you've used. We're not going to allow null passwords. From a security standpoint, that's not exactly something you want to do. Okay, now we're out here. We're creating a access policy. This is what determines whether or not a person has access and how they access Syncope and any of the resources that get connected to Syncope. We have several different versions of access policies we can use. We're going to go ahead and choose the default one, but Each of these have their own specific purposes. All right, there is a step we need to do now before we continue. And before I forget, because it's very easy to forget to set the rules on the policy. You need to come into whichever policy it is. For this instance, we're dealing with the account policy, and we choose the rule that we created earlier. Here is where that JSON got turned into a GUI. So for an account, a maximum number of characters of 100 and a minimum of 3. I'm not going to worry about patterns or uppercase, lowercase. I am going to say you're not allowed to use your email as your username. And then we can click finish. I'm not going to set any prefixes or suffixes or certain words not permitted, but you could if you need to. And in production, you might want to. So that's setting that rule. Then we're going to come to the password. We're going to do the same thing. Max length of 100. Oh, I didn't like that. There we go. Min length of 8. You must have one alphabetical character. One of them must be uppercase, and at least one of them must be lowercase. You must have one digit, and we'll go ahead and ignore the special chars for now. Repeat same means how many you're up, the maximum of allowed repetitions of a given character. We're not going to go ahead. We're not going to set that yet. We're not going to allow them to use their username or their email as their password. All right, now we have the password and account policies set up and the rules attached to them. Now we need to configure the access policy. We're going to go ahead and leave most of this the same. This is the default works. You can have several in here with a different order as well. Now we need to set up an attribute release policy. This is what tells Sonar or Syncope. This is what tells Syncope what attributes of a user are allowed to be released to a given application. We're going to require consent for those attributes, and we'll see what that does later. Now we have the attribute release policy. We need to configure it. We can leave these empty. They, by default, will include all of them. The principal ID attribute here, we want to be username. We will set an expiration of 8 hours, and we haven't set up any attribute repos yet, and we really don't need to, if I recall correctly. So now that we have the attribute release policy set up and configured, we can set the authentication policy. And this I'm going to call slightly different. Syncope authentication policy, because here's where we set which modules we will use for Syncope's authentication. We have not created a module yet. We will come back to this. And at this point, we're done here. So we're going to come over here to WA. And now we're going to set up an authentication module. State is active, order is 0, and here we can set how this authentication module works. This is also what tells the system where to go when it needs to do some authentication process. And in this case, we're going to set it to Syncope auth module, but if we wanted to, we could set it to LDAP or OIDC or SAML. Setting it to any one of these would mean that there's a third external system involved that it will use to generate, gather, and pull attributes about users and create the authentication context. We're going to leave it on the domain master. This is the default domain. Domains are just ways of segmenting users and applications. Now, here's where I've got to come back into because oh, hold on. Yeah, I'm one too low. I need these. These were kind of hard to find. I had to do a lot of digging and research into the various blogs, and oh, there's another step I got to do. We'll get to that in a moment. And it is very difficult to figure out where these came from. Once I've added them all, I will then go add some schemas, because that full name does not exist, not yet anyway. Without having these in place, you can't actually get access to these attributes. That was my experience when working with these and setting them up. Memberships are also known as groups. Memberships is just what Syncope uses. Sub is subject. And in OIDC, that's typically the user ID. Okay. Finish that now. Wrong spot. Types. Types are various ways of creating relationships between pieces of data. As we can see, we've already got email in here. Plain schemas are exactly what they sound like. They're just plain schemas. So we're going to start here. We're going to go give it name. It's got a string type. We don't need to set any validator on it other than it is mandatory. And the reason I need to put true in there instead of doing a checkbox is because this is a Jexel expression, meaning we can check various different schemas and other variables on a user instead of just putting true. We can have it be required if, for instance, the phone number is entered. We do need to set a locale because this will get used by Syncope's end user system to display the field. I'm gonna go ahead and add the last name here as well. Say last name, but what I meant to say was family name. Require it to be true as well. Leave it plain, don't set a validator, leave all of that. Okay, now we need a locale. Now we have a family name and a given name. These are plain schemas. Now we want to derive a schema, which also uses a Jexel expression. And here we're going to call it full name to bring it full circle back to the attributes we just set up. And I'm going to say family name. If I could type, whoops, plus a comma, a space, plus the given name. So this will format the person's name as family name, comma, given name. Need to set a locale for it as well. And these are the locales that are available when you click on the input. And here we're going to say full name. All right, and that is that. We need to come over here into the AnyType classes now and add those in. We're going to go ahead and add everything, including the derived schema. That way it ties those pieces of information to the user. At this point, got our authentication module set up, and it's set up to release these attributes under those external names, which is what we want. Now we're going to set up an attribute repository here. Maybe. Yes. Actually, no. We don't need an attribute repository. That is right. That screen threw me off several times trying to figure out how to get all of this set up. It was a fun time. I believe at this point now, we are ready to start setting up our users and group. Then we can go set up the identity provider for the SonarQube. So we're going to come here, we're going to click on users. And this will take us to a screen that'll let us add users. There's already one user in the system, and that is admin. I'm going to go ahead and call it Richard.Barger. Password management. I can set the password here now if I wanted to. But I'm not going to. Oh, that is because I clicked on that. Now that it's not open, I don't need it. We're going to add the base group, and on the next page, add the base user. I meant on the page after this, add the email. That was my fault. Oops, that should have been family name. I can go fix that, and that's okay. This value is to be derived. Here we go. This is the one we want to add. And finish. This user has been added. Now that's going to propagate out to CAS, which is another system created and maintained by Apache that Syncope uses on the back end to manage its connections to various external systems. That's what the WA link over here on the right points to. Here we're going to create a new group, call it Sonar Administrators. We're not going to add it to any user, or we're not going to set the owner of that group to anybody, and that'll get it to the default of the admin user. I'm not going to add any base auxiliary classes or groups, and then that's going to propagate out. Come back to the user, edit, and add that group. So now the new user I've created is a part of the Sonar Administrators group, which will give me the ability later on to add projects and set the SonarQube SAML stuff up. Excuse me. Okay, now we are going to go configure the SAML 2.0 identity provider for Syncope. We need to make a couple of changes here. Oops, that's not the button I wanted to click. One of the first things we need to change is the entity ID. Where was that? Here we are. Wait a minute. Oops. Here we go. Yep. So the entity ID, which is a part of the root entity descriptor. Right now it's set to CAS, as I mentioned, that is their system that they're using. Then we need to come down here to the bottom to the single sign-on service and change that as well. If I recall correctly. Nope. No, we don't. This is why I documented all of this out, because I knew I would not be able to remember it perfectly. So I had to write it all out. Next, okay, we're going to need to come back and grab these certificates in a little bit because SonarQube needs them in order to complete the connection. Oh, where am I? Great. This is update the entity ID to this, and That's it. Yep, correct. Okay, let me make sure I've got the entity ID set correct here so that it does not fail. There we go. Finish. Okay. Now I think at this point we can go configure SonarQube. Application ID, the identifier used on the, oh, no, actually not yet. You need to client application, SAML to service provider. Here we're going to add that information. This is the other piece of, this is this part here. Set the name to SonarQube. Those must match. Set the ID to 1, not bother with the description. Here's where the access and attribute release and authentication policies come back in. The entity ID, we need to set to SP SonarQube. And we need to set the metadata location to a file that exists inside the container. This file is already included as a part of the volumes that are included with this repository. We can leave the signature location blank because it will, we're not doing metadata signatures. We don't want to assign assertions, but we do want to assign responses. In production, you're definitely going to want to do this information, do these other steps as well. And I will go through how to do that in later steps. We're going to go ahead and set a SKU allowance of 5. Name ID qualifier. Yep. Everything is now set. We can leave these various algorithms empty. The servers will negotiate and figure out which one to use based on which one's allowed on both sides. So now that's set up. At this point, we can go and set SonarQube up. So the provider name is Syncope. The identity of the provider. All right. I believe at this point we are done with Syncope. We can move on to SonarQube, which I have further up here up at the top. Yes, here we go. Set the application ID. Oops. Provider name to Syncope, provider ID to wherever Syncope is hosted. That should be the same as the identity provider or the entity in the metadata we defined earlier. Login URL. Now we need to set the various attributes. We'll go grab the certificates in a moment from Syncope. Yeah, that's the identity provider. Yep. Okay. The user logon, we're going to set to sub. The username, we're going to set to name. The email is email, and the group is groups. Sub, name, email, groups. We want to sign requests, and then we're going to have to set the service provider private key and certificate to whatever we generate in one of the steps that's defined earlier and I've already done. But before we do that, we're going to go back over to Syncope here, back over to SAML, the identity provider. We're going to open this back up and head over to the encryption certificate. My apologies, the assigning certificate. I'm going to grab that and bring it back over to SonarQube. That way, Syncope knows who SonarQube is. That is the identity of Syncope, that particular certificate there. Here, as I said, I've already done this step already, the prerequisite, and I've created a PKC8S8 key, which goes here. It has to be that format, which is not the format that is used when it's generated. I do not recall what that format is off the top of my head at the moment, but it is not the default. And so one of the things you need to do in order to use it is convert it into PKCS, which is actually quite doable. This is not helpful. It's easy enough to set those up. The README in the repository documents it well enough to get it to work. All right, now we're going to hit save on that configuration. Now we're going to test it. Oh. That has never happened before. What am I missing here? What did I do wrong? Set the service provider, we set up the schema, we set, oh, you know what? I know what I've done wrong. What I haven't done yet, I'm going to duplicate that tab and then go to localhost user, which is where I've got the end user application set up. That marker, and I did not actually set a password. So what did they set as the default? All right, well, let's make sure that that user actually has a password. Manage it. The admin of Syncope has the ability to change the password for anybody. And it may not let me do this because of the authentication policies we set up. Apparently it does. Cool. Now here it should force me to change it again because I said it to, but apparently it didn't. Edit profile. You should see all of this information that I set earlier in here. One of the problems with Syncope is by default, it lets users edit their own groups. That is changeable. You just need to set up a custom JSON form, which is also in the repository. What have I forgotten here? Got the authentication module. Did I add that authentication module to the policy? Let's double check. Do not click that button. I did not. There it is. Save that. Close that. And we can test the configuration again. Aha, there it goes. Now, I've set this to be password. Authentication attempt has failed. You know what? Maybe. Syncope is kind of a little buggy. And if you don't do things properly the first time, you'll have to come back and make sure certain things are right. So what I'm doing now is resetting the password for that user, which it apparently, oh, do I need to click that? Yeah, which I believe needs to match the password policy. So I've set a password that should match that policy. What have I done? Whoops. Okay, so I just I messed up the locale setting on that schema. There is a step I think I'm forgetting. It's not that. So we've set those. Set the rules. Now we could add more schemas there. This isn't what I want. Get out of here. Right. No attribute repos. Oh, you know what? Maybe I did need to create an attribute repo. If that was the case, I would have documented it. Yep. All of those volumes should be set up when you pull it down. Set rules, create a schema, set the policies, set the authentication module, set up syncopes, OIDP. Yep, we don't need to change the single sign-on services yet. It works for development. And we set this up. Yeah, here's that prereq. This is how you'll create the key, the certificate, and then convert it to PKCS8. Added the metadata file that is here. What did I do? Yep, that's right. Might be that skew allowance. Status groups, name, email, sub. Yep, that's all right. Let's leave that blank.
So what is the skew allowance?
I believe it's how the amount of time that can be different between two different systems. Because systems don't always have the exact same time at any given moment in time. There could be a skew of a couple of milliseconds between two different servers. Oh, yeah, this is for OIDC. We're not setting up OIDC. SonarQube requires a plugin for OIDC to work. Okay, so we've set those. Glad I built in a little time for this kind of stuff. One of the things I do call out here in this README is that syncope is a little buggy. Okay, let's make sure that this information is correct. Patient ID. That should say syncope, and this should say the provider. Yep, that's correct. That's correct. Sub name, email, groups. That's all correct. Oh, you know what? I meant to click sign requests, didn't I? Yeah, sign request needs to be checked. Save that configuration. Let's try it again. No. Oh no. Okay. Maybe I used the wrong certificate. That's a possibility. Pretty sure it's supposed to be the signing certificate, which would have documented in SonarQube. Where are you? There you are. Value from syncope's IDP metadata. Yeah, well, I apparently did not document that well enough. I'm going to have to fix that, aren't I? Over here, identity provider, edit. Ah, that'll do it. There it is. That is not what that should be. That actually should be, where are we? This. Okay. Now let's try that again. No. I have broken something. Isn't that fun? Save that config and test it again. See if might just need to propagate out. Okay, let's check the cert. Yeah, we used the signing certificate. Let's try with this one. I don't think this is the one we're supposed to use, if I recall correctly. Well, when things like this happen, the only thing we can do is start analyzing. We're going to actually double check everything once again. All right, so we've set the rules to the default account rule. We've set the password to the default password config, added the schema, set it to given name, family name. That's one of the things I messed up. And we did this. We moved it. And we also moved the full name over and saved those. We also set up the default account policy and default account rules. And that's where we saw the JSON in the policy, or in the rule. I mean, we set up the policies where we see the JSON as a web form from the rules. Do the same thing with the password policy and the access policy. Enable SSO and require all attributes, set it to 0, ignore the redirect. That's exactly what we did. Attribute consent is checked. We did that. Principal is set to username, multi-valued, expiration to 5, time unit to days. That we set it to 8 and hours. That should be perfectly fine. Leave the attribute repo. Yep. For now, attribute repositories are unneeded because attribute repositories actually point to other systems, LDAP or OIDC, for those attributes. We set up the Syncope authentication policy. And then we had to go back and re-add the authentication module, which we create here in the next step. Created these attributes, these mappings, because these are what Syncope sees, and this is what we want SonarQube to see. Click edit. We updated the entity ID to be equal to that localhost WA/IDP. And for production, we'll want to change the single sign-on services, but for now it works without that. Saw it working when I started. I know this works. Screen, we don't need to set an owner. We didn't need to add any users because we hadn't. And then here we add users. Sonar administrators, we did. We add base group, management, email. Create, we have our private key, our certificate, and the service provider metadata file. You know what? Okay, let me double check that. the information in the metadata file needs to match the information that is used. It's valid until 2025. Its entity ID is that, which is what needs to go into SonarQube. And then this is the same certificate. And yeah, these are the same certificates. So it's using the same for signing and encryption. We set its single logout service back to what SonarQube has. That is all correct. Let's validate that that is what is happening here. SAML2, check this. Okay, so yep, this is the identity provider. What about it's valid until? Where is that? Yep, these are fine. These are the URLs used behind Docker, which is perfectly okay because SonarQube and Syncope can talk to each other behind Docker. They just can't talk to each other through Docker. So that's right. Client applications, SAML service provider. Yeah, that looks right too. SonarQube ID1 description default. Entity ID is exactly what we just saw in the metadata. And this is pointing to that metadata. Don't need an authentication class. Name ID format should be email address. Don't need a name ID qualifier. And don't need to select any algorithms. Oops. So that should be right. Well, let's push it. Maybe the WA system had not had its information updated yet. See if that config, test it again. Aha, success. So these are all the attributes that Syncope through WA, also known as CAS, will release to SonarQube. We can see that it's going to give me the group Sonar administrators, my name, which is backwards because I failed on setting the locale. Well, let's go ahead and confirm that. And invalid response. Signature was rejected. Okay, and I know why that happened. It's actually because changing the certificate from the signing certificate over to the encryption certificate was the wrong thing to do. This is not the one I want. We want this one. Actually, I'm in the wrong spot. Got that certificate. We're gonna drop it right here. Save that configuration and test it again. Success. Okay, what that means now is if I check this little enable thing, it's already saved it, but I just like to hit save just to be safe. That was not a pun that was intended. And from here, I can log out of SonarQube as the administrator. And I can log in with Syncope. Oh, it's already logged me in. And as I can see, there's an issue. I am not a part of the Sonar administrator group. That's okay. We can fix that. I believe I just set the name wrong, actually. Maybe I spelled it wrong. Administrators. There we go. Finish. Cool. That's been propagated up, but we're going to click the push button again to make sure everything is actually propagated. This time, I think if I refresh, does it give me? No, it doesn't. I need to log out in order for it to recognize the change. Sonar administrators. Yep. Confirm. Loading. I am now an administrator, and I can tell that easily by the fact that all of these are not grayed out. That's not grayed out. I can see administration, and I can make changes to the authentication that I just set up. I can also come over here and look at my account and see Sonar users and Sonar administrators. It ignored that group because it didn't recognize it. So that is SonarQube set up and connected to Syncope over SAML and allowing authentication. Even with a couple of issues along the way, it's fun. One of the things to be aware of is that Syncope is a little finicky, but when it's configured properly, it works like a charm every time. And what we saw, those issues were misconfigurations on my part. So the next steps for this business in a box is going to be working on getting GitLab pushed in, and GitLab will allow us to do what GitHub does, including GitHub Actions. And we will connect that up to Syncope and then set up, as soon as I can find it, here we go. We will set up GitLab. We will set up Service Comb so that we can have microservices up and running, and a custom application to be run in Service Comb alongside GitLab. So GitLab will have a application to build and run and deploy. One of the cool things about this is that we can use GitLab to build, run, and deploy the business in a box, which is the plan. That is the custom application we're going to build and deploy. Yeah, I think that about covers it. Do we have any questions?
I have a ton of questions, but I'm willing to wait.
Yeah, feel free to
All right.
email them to me, or even, if you want to ask them now, I think I can answer them.
Yeah.
Or
Okay. I'll go ahead. So my first question is, so as you were working through problems with this setup and things weren't going well, let's say you hadn't finished your README checklist. How do you troubleshoot, like, while you're in the middle of building these applications or configuring them?
Okay. For Syncope, the best way to figure out what's going on, unfortunately, is through their configurations logs interface. This allows us to, for instance, I can search for anything WA and start, well, okay, that didn't exactly help, but I can change the levels of any class package path inside the application. So if I wanted to, I can change everything. I can go to org, and what that allows me to do from there is to come over into Docker, and we're talking about WA here, and see more logs show up here. They'll show up here in the logs, and then if I need to actually get into the system, I can come over to terminal using Docker Desktop and start typing commands. This will tell me where I'm at. I'm on the root of the drive, which current working directory confirms. So when you change the logging level through the interface, it changes the output in the logs here. You'll have to analyze them pretty closely and figure out what's going wrong. For instance, it took me some pretty deep analyzing in about 3 hours to figure out that the issuer is what was wrong there on one of the problems I faced trying to get this thing configured. That answer the question? Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another question. So I would consider this in the realm of like DevOps, and I consider it to be like a pretty different skill set from being a software developer. So how do you develop your skills in like the DevOps realm of technology?
I would think, that's a fair assessment. This is more DevOps than engineering. To contrast that a bit, because it's open source, you can change it however you want. You can even create a project from their template and start adding your own code on top of it. As a way to increase your DevOps experience, this is a really good way of doing that. You can also use AWS or GCP and set things up there. One of the keys about this is that it's something you can run on your own system at your own house if you wanted to. So that's a really great way to build up that experience by running it at home. Sort of one of the things I'm doing here. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. I could keep going. I I really appreciate this presentation. I'm really excited by it. I'll try not to go too over time, so maybe I'll just ask like one more question.
One more.
So I think you said to me when setting up this class that you did have like an intended use case for this setup. Is there like a software application you're working on to sell, and you're using this stack that you've built?
I haven't started using it yet. I do intend to. I've got a couple of different applications that I've started working on slowly over the past like 3 or 4 years. One of which, for instance, is a card game similar to Magic the Gathering, but not exactly the same. It's different enough that it is its own thing. With like one of the key features of that game is that the point, the way that you win is not by just getting the cards that you need at any given moment in time. It's about stacking the deck against your opponent, because unlike Magic, everybody has a shared deck that they use. Just one idea. Another one that I'm working on is sort of like I guess Kickstarter meets Uber for building things is really the best way to describe it. That one I think is gonna do pretty well as soon as I can get it up. But it's been a few years since I've started on that. Yeah.
Very
you,
cool.
Allie.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you everybody for joining. If you want to watch this again and see how I was debugging or troubleshooting, or if you missed anything, this will be posted on YouTube and our website, probably. Correct me if I'm wrong, Callie. Yeah.
I send a follow-up email to everyone who registered. So if you couldn't keep up with everything, I'll send all the resources out sometime next week once the video is uploaded, so you can review all this stuff again.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys learned something at least and got a little excited about setting up your own business.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Trying to find the Zoom thing. There it is. Don't know why it's on this screen.
Right. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well, Callie. Be safe. Talk to you soon.
See ya.
Oh, I'm just gonna hit end meeting.